Welcome. Thank you for tuning into the Odd Thoughts podcast. My name is Gunther and I am your host, and this is episode two. I'm very excited to bring in episode two. I had a lot of fun doing episode one, so I've been kind of really Jones and themed in to get in and do episode two. Episode one I thought really went really well. I had a lot of fun talking about the subject I was talking about, which was kind of just getting started in life, right? More so relating to how I'm getting started on not only with the podcasting, but general creative outlets like writing and art and how it's kind of affected my life and generally getting started in life and my mental psyche and kind of looking into that. And that was a tough subject, I think, to sometimes talk about. Not the toughest thing in the world, but I think a lot of people can relate to it. So I really enjoyed putting out that podcast. And I've gotten a little bit of feedback, not only from Facebook or on YouTube, but from people in my life, which that's kind of a cool thing. I want my podcasting to be kind of like like an engaging thing where you feel like you're talking with me, talking along with me, and you're kind of listening, and hopefully learning a little something, feeling a little bit of confidence, and just enjoying it in general. And episode one, I thought went really smooth, and I appreciate everybody listening. And if more people hopefully can continue to listen as I put out more episodes, go back and listen because I'm having fun, and I'm gonna continue to do it, and I'm gonna continue to have fun, hopefully. So here we are. Here we are in my very amazing studio. Like I said, in my closet in my bedroom. Humble beginnings for a humble podcast. But I'm here to bring you episode two. Um, I'm kind of thinking, like I said in the first episode, I kind of want to try to keep some themes to episodes, or at least try to have some episodes that are themed. But right now, I'm just trying to get things out there, just trying to put the content out there and feel better about it and gain the confidence and stuff like that. So. It's more so I'm gonna try to go off of maybe things that I'm kind of feeling in the moment and try to do my best to verbalize and also like work through and not just ramble too much. Like like I said, I want it to be semi discussive, semi-informative, a little entertainment as well as a little deep thinking. So, I was kind of thinking maybe that today I would talk a little bit about nostalgia or nostalgic feeling. You know what I'm saying? I'm someone that I get strong emotion when I feel things. When I'm sad, I feel like strongly sad. When I'm angry, I feel strongly angry. And so it's same thing kind of when it comes to that nostalgia. I feel it very strongly. And I think when we think of nostalgia or a nostalgic feeling or whatever, I think most times, at least for me, maybe it's just my maybe ignorance on my side, but I feel like sometimes we equate nostalgic feelings or nostalgia to good times. Yeah, definitely times from the past, but good times mostly. Things that like, a song that we loved or a movie that brings us to a place or going somewhere or just a certain thing, right? Or meeting a certain person in your life that brings us back to a moment whenever from whatever distance away, right? And most of the time it's associated with good. And I think that we should always try to associate it with good. It's not a bad thing to go back and remember good things in your life and feel nostalgic. It's definitely not a bad thing. I get stuck in, I always laugh at like, I was raised like in the 90s all the way until like 2010. Like, I just skipped like to 2000. So, like, I stuck with like a lot of things in my life and I got to let it grow on me. And then when all of a sudden, like, I make this jump and like kind of things start to advance a little bit in my life or things change, I miss things. And I also have always read that sometimes when people that struggle with depression or anxiety or have ADHD, when they feel nostalgia, they feel it super strongly, and it comes on super strong because it's those times of relief. It's certain memories or certain times in your life that you felt that was normalized, whatever normal may mean. You know what I'm saying? So mostly it's thought of as good nostalgia, but I think with most things you could probably flip it, right? I think with all good there does come a side of bad. It's kind of that yin and yang of things. So I think at times you could also maybe feel nostalgic about not the good things, or feel nostalgic, or feel like not so good about the good things. Like you reminisce and you're like, oh man, I really do miss those times. I miss when I was 11 when da 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 this and da 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 that. But then maybe you also think about like, well, also like this happened in my life and this happened in my life and those weren't good. So like I think sometimes then can become associated with bad things, or you feel so bad about the present time when you're feeling in that nostalgic thing, nostalgic moment, that it then puts a damper on what you're feeling in the current moment. Which is where I kind of suffer in the current moment. I feel like a lot of times, like, I get super, super, super nostalgic on like these random moments. And then like I start to build and I start to kind of remember all these little things. And it's like a trickle down effect almost. It's starts with one big major thought and then everything from around that time period. The one movie that I saw in theaters when I was 9 years old with like my dad or something like that. And then I just think about like all the surrounding things when I was nine, or like every movie I've seen with my dad or something like that. Which I mean, like, I love thinking about that stuff. I really do. Like I said, it's don't get rid of the memories. It's good to feel nostalgic or reminisce. But if it turns out to be then intense, and then I start to think like, well, me and my dad don't necessarily go do that stuff anymore, and I'm not 9 years old obviously anymore, but then it starts to get a little upsetting, and then I start to think about. And I really think I sometimes can put myself in that mindset, from that time a little bit. I can kind of put myself in that childish, joy, or that childish feeling, and really put myself back in that place and remember like, oh yeah, this is why I loved it, or this is why it gives me that nostalgia. And then, like I said, it turns into a stronger emotion, which then kind of maybe affects me in that current moment. I find myself doing it so much, especially nowadays. I'm getting a little older. I'm on the later half of 20, in my 20s. I'm 27 almost in a couple weeks. And so I find myself doing it a lot more, and I only know it's gonna increase as time goes on. And I do it a lot, like, I've grown up in the Dallas area. I've spent time. I live in Carrollton now, but I've spent time in Allen and McKinney and stuff like that. So when I go and I could just like cruise around, if I'm going run an errand, sometimes I'll try to like maybe run an errand out that way. And then I go past by like where I used to live, or like old schools, and that gets me super nostalgic. And then I can think about and it just starts to flood in. It just starts to flood in. So I think that kind of leaves very interesting question of, when does nostalgia, when is it good, and then what is it bad? And can it be bad really, or is it just like more so the things that are associated with? And do you call bad memories nostalgia? I think that's kind of a cool thing. So that's just something maybe I kind of want to get into a little bit. Is if like I said, we think of good moments when we think of nostalgia, but then when those bad memorable moments, is that nostalgia, or I guess more so we refer to it as a traumatic thing, right? Because trauma is something that's like an extreme thing that has now caused this then after effect to you, right? It's kind of what we associate trauma with. In a bad is always bad, and usually it always is. Kind of how that's how we describe things. And so then it's like nostalgia is like the good, it's just not called trauma. It's like these extreme good moments that all of a sudden like have left this after effect on it. And so where does when does it become like a fine line? Because we can maybe outline super traumatic moments and say for sure that affects you for the negative, and we could see super good things like, when you got like maybe like the first time you watched this movie and it inspired you to make movies, now you make movies or something like that. Or the traumatic thing be like you got into a car accident and maybe you just don't like driving in cars for a long time, and that's a very legit thing. And so but is it like, I think sometimes maybe more so it's spawned with a same sort of, energy or same sort of thought in you. Even though it's, good versus bad, it's a strong good positive thing and a strong bad thing, negative thing. But I feel like it's the same motivating thing. It's this wave of a memory. Is this wave of reminiscence that brings you into a certain mindset or a certain emotion in the current time. Um, and also, how long? I always think like, is it always like a dormant thing? Kind of also, you know. It's like whenever I listen to a song, and I think back to when I was like 8 years old, or when I was 10 years old, maybe watching like the music video for the first time. I know that that song is gonna exist always theoretically. So anytime I listen to it, I know I'm always gonna feel that specific, memory. I'm always gonna feel that good thing. And I think that's the whole point of nostalgia a little bit, is to kind of key back to those moments, and especially when there's certain triggers, right? There's certain triggers to the good nostalgia, and I'm someone that always like wants to feed into those things, and so I know that if whenever watch a certain movie, listen to a certain song, or I go to somewhere, I sometimes will know that it's gonna trigger me. Sometimes not. Some things I think are so situated in the back of your mind from whatever happened that maybe you just don't remember. You know what I'm saying? And that's another thing is how prevalent are all of your memories, right? We see it all the time. I think these moments in people's lives that I feel like everybody can maybe relate to having those moments in your life where you have a memory from the deepest, darkest depths of your brain all of a sudden come out and you're like, oh my God. You're like, oh, I can't believe I remember that. I remember doing that. I remember, oh God, I remember when this movie, oh, I remember when I did this and we do, oh, la, la, la. Like, I think there very much so. I think everybody can relate to that. And like I said, with good nostalgic moments, I think like the same thing with trauma. Maybe some people don't realize the things they've been through or the things that have been done onto them until maybe a certain scenario pops up, and you may not you may not remember being like a little bit of a trigger warning, but being abused by someone, and until you see their face years later, right? And then all of a sudden these things flood back. There's certain people in my life I know for sure that like I don't remember, because like they've done stuff to me or they wronged me in some sort of way. And so I don't think about them, but then I know I have this feeling because of things like nostalgia that if I do see them again, that it's going to bring up all the wrong things. And that's a scary thing. That's a little scary. And so it makes me scared to sometimes bring up things from the past in general, which I do have a hard time doing sometimes. I don't want to always think about what happened back then. I'm good sometimes. I lived it, and it only led to certain things. And I'm not everything's been great, but not everything's been bad. And I do attribute all these good things in my life to the way I grew up, even if it was, kind of crappy or it wasn't so good. I do have to attribute how I am and the positives in my life to maybe the things that negatively affected me. And so it's hard to it's hard. It's hard to like want to think about that stuff. But if I don't remember, then I'm just not gonna ever remember. And then it's like also then it's a conundrum to think that like, well, what if I then forget? Am I really ever gonna truly forget? And when we talk about super nostalgic feelings or super traumatic feelings, I think those are things that maybe won't they'll stick more so, those really stronger ones, but most things won't. And as I get a little older, I'm not going to remember everything. I'm not going to remember every person I ever met or every little movie I've watched or every song I've ever enjoyed. But the hope is that one day I'll be just like listening to the radio or I'll just be doing something and it gets brought up and I'll work through it then. That's a thing too is what happens in the moment. I think that more so is what it leads into it. It's not just the conception of a moment of nostalgia or trauma, but it's more so in the process of it. Because I know some people that like they don't get very nostalgic. They don't reminisce on their lives like that. And that's okay too. Because even if it's like you live like a perfectly good life or you have a lot of good moments and a lot of memorable moments, I think not a lot of people really care to talk about that stuff, and that's okay. And that's really is okay. Um, and same thing, obviously, with trauma. Not everybody wants to talk about their traumas, and that's an okay thing too. It doesn't necessarily make you stronger for talking about it or not talking about it. I think that's a kind of misconception is when you work through emotion or you feel things that oh it's okay I'm feeling it so I'm letting it out I'm working through it, but all you're really doing is maybe affirming it more so. You know, I get really mad sometimes and I get really sad. And when I feel these strong emotions, it doesn't make me feel like I'm working any way through it. I'm only just feeding into that emotion. And then it only isn't only till later that I then feel like, oh well, like I suppose I didn't need to overreact or like, oh this now I can kind of think about what I did and actually try to work through things. So when it comes to just trying to stay on topic a little bit, but then when it comes to those nostalgic feelings, I want to be in the moment and I want to be like, oh yeah, like I love this. I love the feeling this moment. I love remembering this time of my life. But then also like I know that it maybe is going to lead me into feeling a little upset or maybe a little depressed. And so then I try not to dwell on it. And same things with those kind of traumatic feelings whenever I get super angry and I'm getting super upset with myself, and I tend to take it out of myself. And in all honesty, I'm someone who I'm so hard on myself with that stuff, and I take out my anger on myself because I don't want to take it on other people. And unfortunately, sometimes I do. My mouth moves faster than my brain, so like I get going on my emotion, and sometimes when someone's around me, I direct it towards them, but not at them, and it's an unfortunate thing. I've got such beautiful people in my life that understand that, and so I'm blessed. But I've got to remember that if it's going to give me these problems, and not everything, right? Because sometimes, like, I feel like I don't always like, jump into like a full, like, time travel, brain blast to the past type thing. So, but when I do, I try to keep it minimalized. Which is tough because I don't want to like, I want to try to keep that feeling strong. And I always try to pride myself on keeping maybe a little bit of that inner child in me, trying to stay connected to that inner child, keeping my creativity and my imagination strong, and holding on to memories. I've always thought I've had a pretty good memory, but is it really just for those good times in life, right? Have I really just saved the spots in my brain for those good nostalgic moments? And so I always say I have like only a certain amount of room in my brain. It's like a tank, right? Like I only have, God, it's the second time. Sorry. If you heard me just punch the crap out of the desk. Ow. But I always say that I only have a certain amount of room in my brain. So like information kind of goes in and some goes out, and I'll remember certain things and I won't remember certain things, and so it all kind of comes in cycles. So certain things, if I just try to remember all the good times, I don't think I'm going to be able to have any room to maybe remember the bad times and actually remember how to work through any bad times, because maybe I don't ever pay attention to those moments too a little bit, in the moments of like when I'm in these extreme feelings of like, how do I work through it? Oh, okay, I can kind of do this. And then when I maybe make a little bit of progress, remember that. Why can't I remember that stuff? But I can remember like these little itty bitty tiny details from when I was like 11 or 7 or whatever. But in general, nostalgia, I think, should be remembered as a good thing. I think, also like with trauma, I think there can be, it's hard to say that, but like, because I've never experienced any serious trauma done onto me, physical trauma specifically, emotional and like mental trauma, yes, but like physical, never. But there's also maybe some sort of upside to like I've seen it before of people who have gone through those traumatic things coming out on the other side and using it as like a channel for other things, which I'm always kind of big on trying to preach to myself now, is using emotion to kind of platform into something else. So it's always a process of working through things. So if you're not going to work through it, when does it come time to try to process anything? Do you try to do it when you're in a moment, or do you try to work on it in between moments? And that's always like, like the anticipation type aspect of like, when is it going to come up and when am I going to feel this again? And with nostalgic feelings, you get that big dopamine boost, you know what I'm saying? You get the big old like, oh man, yes. Yes, and I think like even if you're not a super nostalgic person, I think everybody has maybe one or two things that pop up in their head and can kind of be a nostalgic thing, right? But it's one I don't know. It's you want to keep it in a good place. You always want to keep nostalgia in a good place, but you don't also want to live in those moments all the time. I don't always want to be thinking about what was, all the, try to think about all the good moments when I'm in a serious bad moment in the current present time, think to the past, because I want to try to work through the present time. So why don't I try to look forward to after this, these emotional, force that I'm going through or whatever. Well, that's a good thing to think about, I think, right? I think everybody can kind of think that way. I think like instead of thinking about a time when you were happy when you're in a current state of like emotional being, emotional frenzy, I think maybe instead of thinking like a time when you were happy, to think about, oh, I'm going to be happy again. Yeah, that's something to think about. Man, I get I get nostalgic hard. I really tell you, it comes on super strong. It does. And I feel like I get so triggered by I have a tendency to try to like stick to certain things in my life when I enjoy something, whether it be like a movie or a food, or I enjoy doing a certain activity, I tend to do it a lot. I tend to like really stick to that one thing because of how it makes me feel, and I know that I'm always going to feel good. So when I hear music, I always say that I kind of get stuck in like certain time periods when it comes to music. Like I would like right now, like it's either like I usually listen to like either like when it comes to like rap or it comes to like hip hop. I like modern day stuff, but I usually go to like the 90s and like the early 2000s. And then like when it comes to like then I'll listen to like I love listening to like pop punk and emo music, and so and I try to stick to the late 90s and early 2000s because that's where my pop punk and emo music came out. That's when my emo and pop punk music came out. So that's what I stick to. And like with like metal music, have a tendency to try to stick in like the 80s or whatever. So like it's kind of like I have a tendency to try to stick with things, and then with like movies, like I feel like I've seen so many movies, but if I only need to watch it once, if and then I'm like okay, I'm good. Or like I always do this thing where I'll watch a movie and I'll research it, and so like I'll do all this research, or like I'll watch like clips of it on YouTube or come across clips on social media or whatever. So then like I'm always like refreshed on things, but I find myself just like repeating, like these certain things that I like, and it always gives me a little bit of that nostalgic boost. I do fine. So, um, recently, like last night, or mostly almost every night, I like to listen to music just when I'm hanging out, like whenever I'm just doing anything, like when I'm just like hanging out in my room, whether I'm drawing, writing, doing nothing, it doesn't matter. I like to listen to music. So, and I'm really in this trend right now where I'm just listening to late 90s, early 2000s pop punk and emo music, and it's just funny. I just get so like, I kind of can think of certain times like when I get into these moments, I'm like, oh man, I remember, I remember like watching like this music video on VH1, getting ready for like, like fifth grade or whatever, or like being in the car with my mom, like listening to like Red Hot Chili Peppers or whatever. Like, so it's fun. It is fun, and obviously I love those songs and I love those things. So I'm not gonna not, all of a sudden listen to it because it gives me like kind of makes me upset because I'm nostalgic. And that would be that would just suck. It's just like stop listening to those songs in general. It would suck. I can't. I don't have time. There's too much new music. I've I've stayed too far behind. You guys can go on without me, okay? All you guys, all you adventurers into new genres of music. You be brave. I'm gonna stick here. That's so funny. But like it also feeds into other things. Like I always find that with movies too. Same thing. I always feel like I'm in certain time periods with certain genres. And so like I feel very nostalgic when I watch like I remember one of the first like horror movies I remember watching was Halloween. I remember my mom having it. I remember we had like the VHS set tape, and I remember the cover of the VHS was like the pumpkin like face, but then like the one of the ridges on the pumpkin was like a knife. It looked like Michael Myers' like kitchen knife that he uses once in the movie, pretty much. But I remember watching that, and it's always stuck with me. And till this day, I will always say that the original Halloween, like the original John Carpenter, Jamie Lee Curtis Halloween, is my favorite horror movie of all time. I will always say that no matter what. That's never gonna my opinion will never change. And it in part nostalgia, in part because it is a great movie. But I do remember being so young and watching it with specifically my older sister. She she is really a big reason for a lot of like like these all the cool things I always say in my life, all the good like the good music or like cool movies or like kind of the video game interest was all because of her. She taught me all that stuff and harbored my like love for that stuff, and and having a cool. She's 9 years older than me, so I got to grow up with like a teenage sister who thought she was like something or whatever. Nah, I mean like she was cool. She was always cool. I just wanted to be with her, and like what she likes. So, and we're very much so alike. So when she likes something, I find that I follow suit with it a lot. And so I remember watching Halloween with her, and I remember watching like a lot of like I remember like Child's Play for the first time. I remember watching. I talk about this movie all the time because it's a movie that I still like just like don't watch because of like some weird because of a nostalgic feeling, but a bad nostalgic feeling maybe more so. With Don't Look Under the Bed. It's a Disney movie now. Let me tell you, it's a Disney movie, but it's scary. I don't like it. I didn't like the boogeyman thing. I didn't like that imaginary best friend type. I didn't like that. So, but I remember her. She would sit me there, and we would just like watch these movies, and but I have good memories of it because now like when a new horror movie comes out, there's two people I want to see it with. It's either her, my older sister Cara, or my little sister Katie. Like it's literally those two people. Like I don't want to watch them with anybody else because I can't remember like watching scary movies with them. And then I kind of did the same thing with Katie. It's kind of just like the same. Whenever a horror movie would come out, like I kind of remember maybe like One Missed Call. I remember us being going to Blockbuster. Yeah, Blockbuster for sure. It's still been about that time. And getting One Missed Call and going and sitting down at our house and watching it and being like, it's being semi scared, but also like it's kind of a bullshit movie. Sorry, bullcrap movie, but it was good. And so it kind of that trickle down effect of like I remember doing it with my sister and I remember her watching movies with me and doing this stuff, and then I got to do it with my sister. And that's a cool thing because of a nostalgic thing because of how much I enjoyed it. And so I get so strong with that. I think sometimes when I physically see something, I think is when I feel most nostalgic, maybe when I go somewhere, or maybe I'm holding an actual like object, like I'm gonna a little embarrassing, but I have a stuffed animal. I ain't afraid to admit it. I don't care. It's a little stuffed dog. I've had it since I was like, I don't know, 2 or 3, maybe. I've had it for 24 years, 25 years, and I love that thing. And I sleep with it right next to me, or I use it as like when I want to prop my neck up when I'm just like laying in bed watching like videos or whatever. I use it as my neck pillow. But it's his name is Doggy. He's my little stuffed dog. Don't laugh at me because I'm laughing at myself. So joke's on you. But it's just one of those things where every time I look at him, I just think of like all these times, all these like I can think of like every bed that I ever slept in, or like every like place I ever lived, or taking him on road trips, or taking him here, taking him there. So it's pretty funny. I feel it's a physical object. It's something that every day, literally before I go to bed, when I wake up, if I go somewhere, I come back, see my bed, there he is. There's my stuffed animal. And so I get really nostalgic with that stuff. And like I said, when I run errands or I'm cruising around in the car, just doing whatever, just doing me. I try to go out to like places that I used to live, and I don't have to drive very far. I've spent a lot of my time in Dallas, so in the Dallas area. So, but then I get real nostalgic, and I love going there, and it kind of just makes me think about the times I've driven here and how many times I've maybe driven up and down a road, or how many times I've like gone into this school, or I've gone into this apartment, or like, oh man, I remember going to this Target or this Walmart. And I love that. The little nostalgic moments I think are sometimes not as like, not as painful to my heart. Like I said, nostalgia, is it good? Is it bad? I don't know, but I find that those little moments don't always like overextend my emotion. I find that a lot of times I can kind of tame it. Just like I said, with like the every little things of the songs I've loved for as long as, for 20 years, the movies I love for 20 years, all those little things, I still feel like it doesn't make me react as strongly as maybe some of the more specific moments. And yeah, I'm gonna continue to feel nostalgia. I don't ever want to stop. So I'm not gonna like every time I feel nostalgia, I'm not gonna stop myself from feeling it. And I think everybody out there should do the same. I think it's okay to feel those moments, right? I think even if those moments do ride that fine line with trauma, right? As I was talking about earlier, as I know that sometimes there is that fine line. It's the same idea of like a memory, going into the past, going into the future, whatever. But it's the same idea of these memories, right? It's kind of the idea of like, um, it's the idea of this strong emotion that you feel towards a past event. And so, I want to keep feeling. I always want to keep feeling. I want to work through things. I want to put myself in good places and sometimes those uncomfortable places as well. So I'm gonna keep feeling nostalgic and work through it every time. And just think about, instead of like reminiscing about the good times, think about how I can future have good times. And maybe that's also a thing, is if I can continue to create good moments into the future, maybe then I won't have to get so nostalgic, reminiscent. And when I look at old pictures, I feel like I can maybe even feel hopeful for maybe one day my kids having that opportunity, or like, knowing that also like, we all share certain nostalgic moments, right? We all kind of have certain nostalgic moments we can all relate to when certain events or certain celebrities, whatever, right? I like that. A collective nostalgia is fun a lot of times too, especially like in a family. If you went on like a certain family vacation, or like, you're used to like a family game night and maybe you haven't done it in a few years. and then you guys get together and go on vacation or whatever. That stuff's fun. So everybody out there, continue with those nostalgic feelings. And if you're someone like me who feels very strong when you have those type of emotions, you feel so strongly with emotion. I wouldn't say, I wouldn't say suppress it, right? I would say go ahead and feel, but just know that it may have a certain side effect, right? If you it's strong, everything's strong. It comes with the good and bad. It comes with the left and right? The ebb and flow. So I'm sorry. I always get a little. I just like I don't know what to say necessarily. Yeah, I don't know what to say. I think continue to make memories so that you can continue to feel nostalgic, maybe even too, right? So that you don't stop. You don't stop thinking about the good times. And for anybody that maybe finds it hard to remember the good times, or if you do get those times where you do feel the good time, you do remember the good times, but then you also maybe remember the bad that goes along with it. Not everything lasted, right? Most times I feel those nostalgic moments are once, right? They're like only maybe a few minutes in your life, but then they last for years. But then other things, like I feel like like with traumatic things, are just like the bad and negative things will stick forever. And so maybe that's when we learn that really that the good is more frequent than the bad, and maybe you should try to view the good more so. And maybe that's even stupid to say because I know a lot of it. Know it's hard to find it sometimes. I really do. I struggle with that. I know that I struggle with trying to find the good in things, and even in those harder moments, maybe trying to figure, oh, am I going to become better or am I going to become a little bit more? And I struggle, and that's a human struggle. I think that's everybody. Everybody goes through that struggle. So, so. Well, I don't know. That's kind of all I want to talk about a little bit, though. I just wanted to get episode 2 out there. I had a lot of fun doing episode 1. I had a lot of fun doing episode 2. Getting a little bit into nostalgia, like I said, just kind of, diving into it a little bit. I'm trying to keep these episodes relatively short so that I can have room to always talk about a little bit more and then maybe try to do part twos of things and try to continue on. And I've only really touched the baseness of nostalgia and those type of feelings, those reminiscent feelings and strong emotions that are maybe attached to them. It's only so base level I think that you can really dive into. And it really does rely on the person. Everybody's experiences are different. Even when there are those certain crossing lines, right? When your webs do intertangle, it doesn't mean that everything is necessarily equivocated. Everything is the same, right? People live differently and people respond differently. And if you're in a moment of, ire and you're in a moment of hate or sadness or anger, be a little nostalgic. Go and remember those good times, but don't always hang on those good times or those past good times. Try to picture the future times. And also for those bad moments of, those traumatic moments, times of bad, I cannot sit here and suggest to bring them up because I'm not a therapist and I'm not someone who has had maybe serious trauma, have had serious traumatic things happen to them. I haven't had those. So I can't sit here and tell people who have seriously been through traumatic things to bring up those feelings, but maybe if there is a possible way to try to launch into a better feeling or maybe remember those good moments that came out of it or things around it and maybe try to, take away the power of those moments. Well, that's it. I'm done. I'm done with episode 2. I appreciate y'all listening, giving me the time once again. For everybody out there, I love y'all. I really do. I want more engagement, for everybody that keeps listening. And if you want to follow along with me, I'm trying to find the balance of social medias, you know what I'm saying? Try to keep in updates and stuff like that. But for right now, I'm just going to kind of do an episode at a time and post a little of this and post a little of that. And I'm going to try to do content outside of podcasting, stuff that keeps with maybe discussion and trying to maybe do certain little shorter little bits of when I don't have anything to really expand on. I'll just do like shorter length videos, whatever. All right, I'm out of here. All right, everybody, thank you for listening. This has been the Odd Thoughts podcast. My name is Gunther, and I appreciate y'all listening.